Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Wednesday, December 15th. This is Africa 54.
Former South African President Jacob Zuma is ordered to return to jail for medical parole. We'll take a closer look at the COVID-19 risks people living with HIV/AIDS are facing, and how technology is helping transform agriculture on the continent.
Former South African President Jacob Zuma has been ordered to return to jail on Wednesday following a High Court judgment to set aside the decision to release him on medical parole. The 79-year-old Zuma began medical parole in September and is currently serving a 15-month sentence for contempt of court after he ignored instructions to participate in a corruption inquiry. The legal processes against Zuma for alleged corruption during his 9-year reign are widely viewed as a test of post-apartheid South Africa's ability to enforce rule of law, particularly against powerful people. Zuma's legal team says they will appeal this latest decision. Zuma's surrender to authorities in July triggered the worst violence South Africa had seen in years. Haitians are observing 3 days of mourning for the victims of a deadly petroleum truck explosion in the northern city of Cap Haitien. A Cap Haitien government official told VOA an accident sparked the disaster. The driver of a petroleum truck swerved to avoid hitting a motorcycle and lost control of the vehicle, ending up in a canal. The official says people ran to collect the spilled fuel, and that's when it exploded, engulfing them in fire. More than 60 people died and dozens of others were injured. Prime Minister Ariel Henry, who visited victims in the hospital Tuesday after surveying the damage, later tweeted emergency funds have been dispersed. He also added that steps are being taken to organize national funerals for the victims. Benin is adopting a new law legalizing abortion in most cases, one of the few African countries to do so. A conservative country, the law was passed by Parliament to prevent a wave of clandestine abortions that have resulted in deaths. Kwam Joel Honoré reports from Cotonou.
5 years ago, Francine became pregnant. A student at the time, she was afraid to tell her parents. She asked VOA not to use her real name and protect her identity.
I couldn't tell my parents because I was still in college, and if they learned of my pregnancy, I was going to stop going to school.
She ended up getting a clandestine abortion, but the procedure went badly and she had to be hospitalized.
When we got here, we were taken to the consultation room. I lay down on a table, and when I took off the filling I was wearing, things were coming out of me. They told me it was my intestines.
There has been an increase of clandestine abortions this year as sexual assault have risen, says the head gynecologist of Aplahwe City Hospital.
I had to manage 3 cases of clandestine abortions. There is one who died, and there are 2 teenagers, 17 and 18 years old, who are alive, but they no longer have their uteruses.
According to Benin's Ministry of Social Affairs, 200 women die each year as a result of complication. This led the government to introduce a law in October authorizing abortion to stop such death.
Avec le constat qui a été fait,
we really had to react. We have hundreds of women who died in deplorable conditions because they wanted to try to abort under non-secure conditions.
But Benin's clergy and traditional leaders oppose the law as an attack on life.
La vie de l'homme est quelque chose d'important.
The life of a human being is something important and must be considered. The problem is to know in what conditions the woman got pregnant.
But those who have had complications from clandestine abortions says there should be no debate about saving the life of women.
When we get pregnant and don't want to keep it, we have to be helped. Pregnancy prevents us from going to school.
Benin's government is preparing to launch a public awareness campaign in schools and throughout the country about merit of the abortion law. Kwam Joel Honoré for VOA News, Cotonou, Benin.
Despite shaky health systems and vaccine drives, the coronavirus pandemic did not hit Africa as badly as many feared. But it did take a toll on the continent's economies in 2021 as movement was restricted. The pandemic also underscored vaccine inequalities. Linda Giftash has more from Johannesburg.
When the coronavirus first hit Africa, many observers feared the continent's overall poor healthcare would result in massive casualties. Many Africans are high risk for severe infection due to diabetes and tuberculosis, both too common on the continent. But Africans make up just a fraction of COVID's global death toll.
One good thing for Africa is that the young population is kind of an advantage for the continent, because even from the statistics for COVID, we have seen that the young people are presenting, majority of them really asymptomatic or mild symptoms. And so as a result, at the beginning of the first 2-3 waves, we see the reported cases are not so much in terms of people that end up in the hospital.
But vaccine inequities have left Africa vulnerable, with less than 10% of the population vaccinated. While vaccine shipments to Africa have increased in 2021, distribution remains a challenge. The WHO cites poor access to vaccines as causing virus variants and new waves of infections.
The population is susceptible, of course. The virus has an opportunity to spread and mutate very well. But we need more to cover more populations in Africa so that we can reduce the risks of all this evolution of variants.
Western nations' travel bans over the Omicron variant have worsened the pandemic's economic damage, as many African countries rely on foreign tourists. In South Africa, the continent's worst hit by the pandemic, unemployment is near 35%. Frustrations exploded in July as political protests turned into widespread riots and looting.
The politics of hunger and desperation has really come to the fore. And by July last year, as we started seeing an opening up of restrictions or less restrictions, we recorded on the Public Violence Monitor that is run by the Institute for Security Studies the highest number of protests ever since we started monitoring protests in 2013. So people were desperate to be heard and desperate for help.
After the worst recession in decades, the African Development Bank projects an economic rebound for Southern Africa in 2022. But the ABD says that recovery also hinges on successful vaccination programs. Linda Giftash for VOA News, Johannesburg.
Many medical experts say people who are immunocompromised can be more vulnerable to developing some severe forms of COVID-19, including people living with HIV/AIDS. They say the failure to get COVID-19 vaccines to HIV patients puts them at greater risk. In part 2 of health correspondent Lino Mudu's interview with Salim Abdul Karim, director of the Center for AIDS Program of Research in South Africa and former co-chair of the South African Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19, he discusses tackling HIV/AIDS during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Let's talk about the treatment or the care of HIV patients is done in light of COVID-19. How much you talked about immunocompromised people. Can you elaborate a little more how it presents some challenges and maybe some opportunities?
Africa accounts for about 70% of the world's HIV burden. And in Africa, we have continuing high rates of new infections, particularly in young women. COVID-19 has created a whole new set of imperatives. Coronavirus has taken attention away from HIV, has taken funding away from HIV. And importantly, that some of the measures to control coronavirus has led to lower usage of services for HIV. We've seen fewer tests being undertaken, fewer people starting treatment. So we've got to change that trajectory. We've got to get our services back. And mostly that has happened because our services are quite resilient. I think the big challenge that we face right now is that we've got to find a way to identify those individuals who have HIV infection and who are severely immunocompromised, but they don't know they have HIV. And it's a difficult thing because you've got to reach out to those individuals and you don't know who they are. So our testing programs are going to need to ratchet up a notch to try and identify and pick up as many people as possible so that in our overall attempt to deal with HIV, which we do through what is commonly referred to as the 90-90-90 targets, that one of the critical issues is that we really need to get above 90% of those individuals who are HIV positive that know their status, because that's critical if we are to deal with this problem.
So for someone who's HIV infected, what do you tell them in terms of the vaccine?
What we have seen is that HIV patients seem to respond and react to the vaccines pretty much in the same way as HIV negative individuals. Now that applies mostly to people with HIV infection who have a CD4 count above 250. Now, in those individuals, their immune system is still able to identify the vaccine, it's still able to respond and generate antibodies. So it seems that HIV positive individuals who are not immunocompromised, there is really no issue. In immunocompromised individuals, in other words, low CD4 counts, very low immune cells that are available to respond, in those individuals, we need to monitor them much more carefully. We need to make sure they are taking their treatment, that they are virally suppressed, that their CD4 counts are coming up. And in those individuals, that will allay any concern about vaccination because they can readily be vaccinated.
What can we learn from the COVID-19 experience that could help with regards to HIV research? Is there a silver lining in here?
Having been involved in HIV for the past 36 years, there have been many lessons that I have seen and gained in the course of that time from HIV that would benefit COVID-19. Similarly, we are seeing new developments in COVID-19 that would benefit HIV. For example, we're seeing completely new vaccine platforms like mRNA. So they are giving us a bit of impetus to do better in our new technologies for HIV. But perhaps the most important thing that I have learned from HIV is the importance of mutual interdependence. In HIV, like in COVID-19, each person's actions influences other people's risk. So we are fundamentally dependent on each other. One person who is not taking prevention measures affects the whole community because that's the individual that starts off a chain of transmission. So it becomes really important that we appreciate in COVID-19, as we do in HIV, that every one of us has to play a role. As the WHO has said, no one is safe until everyone is safe.
Dr. Salim Abdul Karim, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Great pleasure.
That was Professor Salim Abdul Karim, Director of the Center for the AIDS Program of Research in South Africa and former co-chair of the South African Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19, speaking to Africa 54 health correspondent Leno Mudu. Still to come, a Zambian agroeconomist helps commercial and smallholder farmers to invest in data-driven agriculture. But first, Haiti Adams tells us what's coming up on Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
Be sure to join me for the next Straight Talk Africa as we review Africa's most important stories and memorable moments of 2021. Was it a year to remember or one we would rather forget? We'll look at the stories that made headlines across the continent and the world in 2021. Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Lung cancer is the deadliest form of the disease, according to the American Cancer Society. But it doesn't get nearly the same amount of research dollars as breast or prostate cancer. That may be changing thanks to one man's efforts and new guidelines from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. VOA's Sabah Shah Khan explains.
Lung cancer kills more people in the United States each year than colon, breast, and prostate cancer combined. It accounts for roughly 25% of all cancer deaths, according to the American Cancer Society. While smokers are the most vulnerable, anyone can be affected. Former National Football League player Chris Draft has lived these statistics. He lost his wife to the deadly disease just a month after their wedding in 2011.
So she was stage 4 lung cancer, 37 years old, no history of smoking, this ultimate healthy lifestyle, go-get-it person. And unfortunately, is diagnosed late. And then there's been some amazing advancements. Those advancements, a lot of them really, you can trace them directly from 2011. But unfortunately, my wife couldn't be on some of the newer targeted therapies. So she was on standard chemo and passed a year later.
To honor her memory, he founded the Team Draft Family Foundation to help lung cancer patients and their families while also campaigning for more research. Draft's foundation was created before his marriage, when his then fiancée asked friends and family members to donate to the foundation instead of giving them wedding gifts. 10 years later, Team Draft continues to advocate for lung cancer research. The field has advanced significantly in the last few years, say doctors.
There are groups of patients who have a threshold level of smoking whose lives can be saved by doing a screening study, which is a CAT scan. Additionally, there are a lot of advances in the medical treatment of lung cancer, such that we can look at genetic signatures or markers within a tumor, and we now have medicines that can actually target those specific cells, which is also a great advance over the last decade in lung cancer.
In light of these new therapies, the CDC recently modified its lung cancer guidelines. The new guidelines recommend that smokers who have been smoking for 15 years get a CT scan every year at the age of 50. Unless at high risk, non-smokers are not subject to any screening criteria at the moment. As with all cancers, the goal is to catch the disease in its early stages.
When we find people who have lung cancer, the tumors tend to be smaller and earlier stage, so that we can intervene with modalities like surgery to try and cure them.
Screening scans have cut lung cancer fatalities by 26% in men and 61% in women, according to the European Cancer Research. Draft says research is the key to saving lives.
So if we want things to change, we need to lean in on the research. People who have less of a smoking history or not one at all can get where they can detect it early, that we go and save as many of the people as possible that we have now.
Lung cancer affects more women than men worldwide, with over 600,000 women dying from the disease each year. Sabah Shah Khan, VOA News, Washington.
In technology news, data is becoming a key asset for agricultural transformation in Africa. For example, high-speed internet is changing how small farmers prepare for the different seasons. In Zambia, a young agroeconomist is working with commercial and smallholder farmers to invest in data-driven agriculture for timely, relevant, and reliable information that helps them plan and monitor their crops. Africa 54 technology correspondent Paul Ndiho spoke to Tunchimunya Munyama, the CEO and innovator at NetAgro Technologies in Lusaka, Zambia.
Nchimunya Munyama, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you so much.
You are on the cutting edge of technology. You're trying to make sure that the farmers in that part of the world use technology to add value to their crops, and you are making a difference. What is it that you've been able to do up to this point?
The story comes in a way that I looked at the way I have been brought up in a farming environment where we didn't have enough water for our plants. Of course, the country has so many rivers and dams. We don't manage our water efficiently. So I was like, you know what? What if we create a system that understands the needs of the plants and the farmers? So that was the birth of the innovation called the NetaGrow that helps farmers manage the resources, water, and also manage the land to grow their plants on. So it uses artificial intelligence to either calculate how much water the plant needs and also how much fertilizers the plant needs as well.
When you talk about farming, especially where you are, most people do subsistence farming. They don't do commercial farming. And those people engaged in subsistence farming are not maybe savvy with the kind of technology that you're talking about. How many people have access to that artificial intelligence or can figure out how to use that technology that you're putting in place?
The beauty about this innovation is that it's not using conventional means. Talk about computer systems, expensive irrigation systems. So with just a smartphone or any other small phone without access to internet can have this innovation right in their hands. So they can have control over their system by either sending an SMS to say pump on, pump off, or they can have direct access to the variables around their farm. Talk about soil moisture, humidity. So the farmer is aware of what is going around his field, and from that it can easily help him, even without access to big computers, big smartphones, or with just a simple phone without access to internet.
The rural farmers who don't have access to that internet or who don't have access to those phones, but they want to take advantage of what you're presenting to them, how can they do it?
Okay, so there's actually what we call the NetaKit. It's a simple and very efficient device that has attached to a simple screen that they can just plug in or stick into their soils. Of course, it's an on-site. You don't have to have a phone. It will just show you the readings on the screen about what's happening on plants. Basically, we are targeting small-scale farmers, commercial farmers, and those who just love farming and small gardens, just as to empower them to have that chance to also grow their own food.
How did you get started?
The initial idea came in when I was just a little boy trying to grow food. I was this inquisitive young boy, curious young boy. I was trying to solve my grandfather's problem of water management. So I was like, we are wasting so much water on just a small piece of land. What if I can create something that understands the needs of the farmer and my grandfather as well? So I came up with this idea, okay, what if we can create something that doesn't understand, not only understand the needs of the farmer, but also the plants. So I signed up for a simple course in programming. I guess that was the beginning of everything, and from that on point, I turned the hobby of just planting crops and trying to grow my own food into a real passion to actually make a change in this sector of agriculture.
Where do you see NetaGrow going in the next 5 years?
NetaGrow is something huge. As a social enterprise, I see it to be some impactful initiative that not only provides a service to the people in terms of agriculture, but also in the industry of forestry, forest fire detection, smart agriculture, and also the part of impact on the youths in terms of teaching them coding skills, teaching them skills about design, electronics. So I see NetaGrow in the next 5 years as this tech giant that has impact for the youth and on the economy of our country, and ultimately Africa at large.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
That was Africa 54 correspondent Paul Ndihot speaking to Nchi Munyama, the CEO of NetaGrow Technologies. A drop in the levels of rainfall around Lake Chad in Cameroon is causing waterways to dry up and is worsening the conflict between farmers and herders over scarce resources. Anzwaka reports from Kuseri on the border with Chad about efforts to make peace between the communities.
Gaddafi looks at the damage to his property during a recent clash between farmers and herders in his community. It is still difficult to remember when he lost everything.
We lost millet, rice, goats, chickens, many things. At the time, I had money, 400,000 FCFA that I put under the mattress. They burned it, as well as the medicine for my health.
The scarcity of water in the far north region of Cameroon is the cause of the conflict. Gaddafi says the Muslim community dug a reservoir to water their farms and raise fish. But Arab herders wanted the reservoir closed, saying it was a death trap for their livestock. The two sides failed to compromise and the situation escalated.
The fight started here at our place. The Muslims came to attack us. We called on our brothers. When the Muslims saw there were more of us than them, they fled. So we pursued them, broke and burned their village.
VOA requested interview with officials of Cameroon's far north region who said they were not available to comment. According to the United Nations, over the last decades, the surface of Lake Chad, which feeds the far north of Cameroon, has decreased by 95%. Communities living along the lake, most of which are water dependent, are fighting for control of the drilling resources, resulting in death, displacement and destruction of property. UNHCR and Cameroonian authorities recently organized a reconciliation ceremony in which community representatives committed to ending the violence. The UN organization also donated walls. This was not enough to resolve the conflict, as new violence broke out a few days after the ceremony.
This is the beginning. The restoration of peace is a long process, but we have just committed ourselves resolutely with all the parties involved in the conflict to the path of reconciliation, of social cohesion through dialogue and not through violent clashes.
Experts believe that other solutions should be pursued.
The ideal solution would be to find alternative resources, alternative fishery resources that can go, for example, through modern fish farming or the creation of artificial ponds.
In the meantime, Gaddafi has set to rebuilding his house in hopes that no one will destroy it again. Anne Zwanke for VOA News, Kuseri, Cameroon.
And that wraps up our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.